Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Uncle Mad, surprise, live, emergency, uh, video, podcast, whatever you want to call this thing. Gary Smith, shocking news out of Nashville SC this morning. Fired, no longer the head coach at Nashville SC. I'm going to pull up the official announcement tweet because I wanted to read through a few of the key points there. It's funny. They've got like this post right now with like a Thor yelling meme because we got a player into the. We got who is it? Zimmerman made the team of the match day for this week's midweek game. So it's funny for the admin at the Nashville SC Twitter account to be having to tweet out a kind of funny meme thing just a couple hours after they tweeted out that they fired the coach. I'm going to read the official press release that Nashville SC put out this morning. At 10 a.m., Nashville Soccer Club announced today the departure of Gary Smith as the club's first head coach, concluding a 7-season tenure that witnessed the team reach the playoffs for 6 consecutive seasons in the USL Championship and Major League Soccer and the League Cup's 2023 final. Assistant coach Steve Guppy departs the club as part of the change. There's Nashville SC extends gratitude, blah, 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 blah. Former player and current player development coach with Nashville SC, Rumba Mumfali, will step up as interim head coach while the club conducts the search for the next head coach. Yeah, that's pretty interesting right there. All right, in the chat, we had Zay Collins said right here. Also, could you talk a little bit about the new coach? I'm guessing he's talking about Rumba there, who's been announced as the interim. I'll get to that in a second. First, I want to talk about the Gary thing in general. If you watched the game day vlog I had from last night, I was definitely, for the first time, starting to really lean into the, Gary outside of things. I wasn't even still ready to fully go there and say like, hey, let's make the move here. But I mean, some of the matches this season, just the lack of creativity and attack. And then last night, here we go. Richard Greenberg, number one Toronto FC fan in the chat, says, you beat my TFC and you fire your coach. Richard, I think last night's game, with your team missing so many players through injury and suspension, to not have been able to muster a shot on goal, to really struggle and fight to have to get the 2 goals we did. I think we only had 7 total shots in the game, which was only 2 more than our just like abysmal performance last week against Charlotte. It just the things were stacking up. The issues with the attack are becoming too much to overcome. It's kind of been something fans have complained about almost from the get-go with Gary's style of play. But, when the defense was playing better, when we were consistently one of the best defenses in the league, leading leagues and shutouts type things, you could kind of get away with it a little bit, more than you can now, where now we're starting to be a little leaky on defense. We're conceding goals in a way we haven't before. So, I think I would share the same sentiment I've heard from a lot of people online so far today. At this point, it's not terribly surprising that they moved on from Gary Smith. I thought he would almost definitely at least get through the season. That's what's surprising about it, the timing of it, coming off a win with another match in like 2 days, a really quick turnaround for the interim coach to step in and try to get the team ready for Saturday. Very odd, and it almost makes me wonder, is it, I'm sure the results on the field, the performances are the biggest factor, but I wonder if there were conversations that were happening between Gary Smith, our general manager, Mike Jacobs, our team president, Ian Ayre, our ownership, John Ingram. I wonder if there was conversations going on about how do we fix this? How do we move forward? What can we do? And there was kind of a feeling between them, like a falling out, a breaking down of the relationship there, and they felt they couldn't continue. Like kind of, it's similar to what we saw happen with the Titans with the firing of Mike Vrabel, where Mike Vrabel been a very successful coach, super popular, super successful, a great run in here in the Tennessee Titans, but ultimately his relationship with the ownership and the front office was breaking down, and that led to him being fired and then trying to find a more cohesive unit there. And that could be part of the thing with Nashville SC, because I think the other interesting note is I think a lot of people thought, to get back to the interim coach, if Gary Smith was fired, his lead assistant, Steve Guppy, would be the most likely candidate to be a part of or to be the interim coach going forward. But it was announced he's departing as well. Is that a decision to just completely clear out the Gary Smith influence? Was that Steve Guppy just going down with the ship saying, hey, you're firing my guy, I go too? We don't know, but that's a very interesting part of the story here. Zay says it had to happen. Gary was the reason for the losses, that the players are not able, as the players not be able to play. I do think, the style of play, the lack of creativity and attack, that has to start to be more looked at Gary. But I think you do have to acknowledge, made the playoffs every single year. And I know that's not the goal. The goal should be to win championships. But, there's 100 teams in this league that can't sniff the playoffs. Go back to FC Cincinnati's first, 2-3 years in expansion team. They would trade in a heartbeat for what we've had here in Nashville. And I really think the roster overachieved, and maybe now we're kind of looking at it going, oh, why is he not getting the best out of these players? And I think maybe we're just starting to see that the roster maybe wasn't as strong as it looked like from the get-go, and it's coming to fruition, like overachieved, played above their head a little bit, and kind of falling back down to earth, and playing more to their level. And you need something more from the manager to bring up players like that. And, the speeches, you see it in sports all the time. At a certain point in time, the managers just kind of becomes a repetitive sounding board, and the players start to tune them out. So, see here, what was the reasons for the suspension? Had no idea it was a fight. Yeah, and then Joseph said in the thing, there was a scrum after the game with NYFC ended, some punching, pushing. Yeah, it was a weird situation. You got to go back and watch that one. That whole deal is so weird between Toronto and NYFC, and also with Toronto's coach. He got suspended. He also accused NYFC's coach of punching a player on their team. It was quite wild. I would love it if we got Klopp, because Ian was the one that hired him at Liverpool, and he'd have that German connection with Hani. And since he has a run out of energy, MLS is a perfect spot for him. That I've seen like a lot of people kind of jokingly throwing out Klopp, but the line, he's run out of energy, so MLS would be perfect. That's actually pretty smart. Yeah, I don't think there's any chance in the world it's going to be Klopp. He's going to sit out a year, and then he's probably going to end up at like Bayern Munich or because I think Bayern probably tries to keep Tuchel for one more year and then gets rid of him and brings in Klopp, or Klopp could even go, if Ancelotti decides it's time to step away at Real Madrid, Klopp could end up there. Yeah, there's going to be a lot bigger clubs coming after Klopp when he's ready to come back in. I wanted to go back to Zay's comment that I highlighted earlier. Also, could you talk a little bit about the new coach? Let me make sure I can say his name again. I don't want to mispronounce it. I probably mispronounced it, even though I am. Rumba Munthali will step in as the interim head coach. He's the player development coach for Nashville SC. I believe he started with the club in 2023, so he's relatively new. I just listened to Pharmaceutical Soccer's emergency podcast, as well as Club and Country USA's podcast, two great Nashville SC podcasts. If you're looking for more information, more probably informed content than what I'm offering, I'm just a fan spitting my thoughts. They gave a great rundown of his history, where he's come from. He has some connections with Mike Jacobs, and that's kind of where he got his way into the club, and probably why Mike Jacobs trusted him to be the interim spot. But if I'm looking at that, if I'm looking at the departure of Steve Guppy, if I'm looking at the fact that it's Rumba Munthali and not, say, Matt Pickens or Kosi Kimura, who've been, part of Gary's coaching setup since we've been in MLS, who, played on the USL version of Nashville SC, it feels to me like this interim is very much a caretaker, short-term interim thing. And like when I go back to saying that I was surprised with the timing of the firing Gary Smith, I don't think this was a gut reaction thing. I don't think this was just a, had a bad game here type thing. We gotta, do something. I think this was thought out. I think they were getting their ducks in a row. Mike Jacobs has been, for better or worse, very deliberate, very thought out in the moves he's making. Even with the transfers, you can look, we just, traded Mackenzie Gaines to Houston, acquired some international spots, some TAM, GAM, with an eye to being able to make a move in the summer. We've seen traditionally Mike Jacobs has these players earmarked for a while. Like we knew Shaq Moore was the target for several months. Last summer, we knew Sam Surridge was the guy for a while before they could finally get the deal done. I think the timing of this, if they fired Gary Smith, I'm hoping, but I'm also kind of reading the tea leaves. I think there's a plan. I think they know where they're going next. I think that's why they went with somebody like this guy. I've said his name like 20 times today. I can't remember it. Rumba Munthali. I think the expectation is that he would still be around under the next coach, because he's maybe, player development. That's not somebody who's necessarily, I don't think, is like directly involved with the coaching setup. So he's not somebody that the next guy would be kind of pushing out the way Kosi Kimura or Matt Pickens or some of Gary's other assistants might be. So I think this is a guy who's patching in 2-3 weeks, a month maybe, and they've got the next guy lined up and are planning on who to go with next, and know they need to bring in somebody who's a little bit more steady and whatnot. And I think they know that. I think they've um, already probably made a decision or have a short list of guys they're looking at. Be careful if they try to bring in Bob Bradley. Yeah, not gonna lie, I was a big Bob Bradley fan back in the day. I thought he kind of got the short end of the stick during his time with the U.S. national team, and then when he went to Swansea. But I do think he's kind of, it seems to have hit that wall. Certain managers, they have a certain way of doing things, and if they don't evolve, it just kind of, they don't keep up. And I think that's kind of a little bit of Gary's issue too. Was his strategy, his style of play worked for a time, but he hasn't been able to take that next step. But yeah, Bob Bradley is one of like several names I've seen that are on some lists. I'm actually let me pull this up really quick. Actually, Chris Ivey, who covers Nashville SC, really on the ball, had a list, like an article out already with a bunch of potential candidates. And I don't think these are any that are necessarily like rumored or, connected. He just literally pulled up every potential coach he could think of and threw all the names out there. And so I just want to kind of highlight a few of them that I found interesting. So he grouped them by foreign-based managers, USL Championship up-and-comers, former MLS managers, recently retired players, and then assistant coaches from around the U.S. men's national team and MLS. I'm just going to highlight a few because he put out a really extensive list. Go look at it. It's on Broadway Sports Media, the Speedway soccer page. Definitely want to check that out, by Chris Ivey. Check that article out if you want to read the full list. I'm just going to highlight a few names. Foreign-based managers, he's got Ole Gunnar Solskjaer at the top of the list. You can see this here. Manchester United fan here. I'm very familiar with him. Once again, I thought he got a little of a raw deal in his time at Manchester United because he was kind of at the tail end of the previous regime where they didn't really have much of a strategy for how to buy players and build a squad. But I also, I think he showed he really didn't have the high-level tactical acumen you need to be a high-level manager. He was able to pull out some tricks and come up with some good one game off kind of strategies to get some things done for the team. But yeah, and I think he could probably be more successful at MLS than he probably was at Manchester United. But I don't know. I could still see him looking for another job up in Europe. It says here he was recently linked with the Canadian national team job. So he's definitely in the market to potentially move to this, part of the world. Another one, this one's been bubbling up as like an MLS candidate just in general. David Moyes, longtime Premier League coach. It's already been announced he's leaving West Ham at the end of the season. Once again, a former, Manchester United guy, another guy I have a lot of familiarity with, a guy I don't have a lot of fondness for because of that familiarity. I got to be honest, I wouldn't want Moyes to come in. I feel like it'd be, trading out one kind of aging British manager with old school tactics for another. Obviously, Moyes has done it at a higher level than Gary Smith ever did. So, you have a little bit advancement, a little bit better. But, I'd rather see us bringing in somebody younger with like more modern approach to the game. Because, the whole reason we're firing Gary Smith is because of his tactical approach wasn't getting the job done. I think it's got to be somebody that's got to have some of that more fresh, new, modern approach to football, soccer, whatever you want to call it. Henry's on the list. I don't see that happening. Michael Carrick, that'd be cool, but I think he's going to hang around and wait till he can find his way into the Premier League. USL candidates, Landon Donovan, he's coached and bounced around a little bit. I really like him. I don't know what his level as coach is. I liked him as a player. He's one of my favorite players ever, so I'd be interested in that. Former MLS managers, a couple of these I've already seen mentioned in the chat, as we said. Bob Bradley, super successful up to a point. Really good for a stretch with LAFC, but just then after that and then into Toronto, not quite the level that he once had. So yeah, hard to see him coming back. I don't know. Bruce Arena's out there. I think he would be. I'd be interested. I've always been a fan of Bruce Arena. I liked him with the national team. I think once again he's another guy that got a little bit of a bad rap. Like he had to kind of try and pick up the pieces for the end of the Klinsmann era, and it was a little bit too little too late. He's shown the ability to win in MLS. He's probably the most, arguably successful coach in MLS history. I think for a short-term thing, like if you're saying we've got a roster that's can be competitive, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Can we get somebody in who can just spark and get the best out of this team for the next year, 2 years before we have to hit the reset button? I don't think Bruce Arena is a bad candidate in that regard, but he's also, there's a lot of baggage from whatever went down at the end of his time in New England that we still don't really know what that was. Ronnie D'Elia's on the list, won the cup with NYCFC, but then just kind of went to Europe and washed out there. So he's available, but, says here, would he be quickly looking to bounce back to a European job? Like, yeah. Anybody else on this list that's interesting to me? Wayne Rooney, another United one. Don't see that happening. I think he, left DC because he probably wants to be back in England is my guess. Recently retired players, Michael Bradley's on the list. That's interesting to me just because, like I said, I was a fan of Bob Bradley. I think he was successful, at a certain point in his career. And, Michael's the younger, more modern version of Bob. That's great. But, I mean, we don't really know what he's going to be as a coach. Most people expect he's eventually going to go into coaching. It'd be a pretty big jump to kind of hop right in the middle of a season with the MLS team. But, you never know. You never know. I would certainly wouldn't be opposed to seeing it get a shot. He's an assistant at his father at Staubach right now. So I don't know. This has Jack Wilshere on the list. I don't know about that. I don't know anything about that. Said he had conversations with the Rapids about their vacancy this past offseason. I'm going to skip down. There's one more name on the list that I find particularly interesting, and maybe honestly not even really knowing that much about this person. They might be my top candidate, at least from this list. Kwame Ampadu. So I'm going to read what Chris wrote about this. Not a familiar name to many, Ampadu serves an assistant to Wilfred Nancy. As long as Nancy and the crew keep producing gorgeous soccer with stellar results, Nancy's assistants will keep getting looks within the league. Ampadu himself has had a successful playing career in England's lower tiers and is the father of Leeds United's Ethan Ampadu. So I'd be very interested in that just because that's almost kind of looking at like the Arsenal Mikel Arteta model. You can't get Pep Guardiola. You can't get the most successful coach going in the league right now. Get the guy that's set at his right hand, that knows his tactics, that understands how he's doing what he's doing, and can hopefully bring a little bit of that to your club to replicate that. So from that perspective, Columbus assistant Kwame Ampadu, that he's an interesting candidate to me. Like I said, I think the club probably has a plan, probably knows what they're doing. I think the timing of Gary's firing would suggest that. I don't think you just randomly pull the plug at this point unless you know what you're doing next. At least that's what I'd hope for. Because if they just have no plan, if they've just decided enough's enough and are just going to wing it, that's not good either. Let's do. Shame how if the League's Cup final PKs ended differently, then Gary's Nashville legacy will be viewed a lot differently. Yeah, you get that one cup, you get that any kind of trophy in this, and it's a whole different thing. I do think, and I've heard a lot of people say this on, like I mentioned, I listened to the Pharmaceutical Soccer Podcast and Club and Country USA podcast. And I think over time, I think a lot of people are mad right now, just fresh memories of what we've been seeing on the field the last, few months or so. I think when we look back at it, someday down the road, whether it's, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I think people are going to look back a lot more fondly on Gary Smith than they currently are. I mean, I really think, I've always kind of felt similarly, like he had a similar vibe to Jeff Fisher, if you're old heads like me who were around for those days of the Titans, where it's good enough coach to keep you in the mix, have you there, maybe if everything goes right, win you a championship, but also has a certain ceiling, has a certain level, certain point in time, you get burned out on it, you get a little tired of it, you get a little, want to see something different, want to see something new. You move on, and now you look around Tennessee, Jeff Fisher is probably one of the most popular people in the history of the Titans organization at this point in time. And he probably wasn't there for a lot of the fan base towards the end of his tenure. And I think Gary Smith's probably the same way, where I think we're going to look back, we're going to say, especially we've had it really good here. I think people kind of underestimate that when they've been calling for Gary's head, 7 straight years of playoffs, League's Cup final, getting there. I completely agree, Joseph. Things would be a whole lot different if we'd won that. We might have even been able to spark that, and maybe some of that hangover, that just feeling of failure has just lingered, and maybe the team just kind of felt that was the best we could do. That was the peak of our achievement, and we failed and hasn't been able to recover from that. So, but I do think, especially if we hit a rut, if we start having some lean years like clubs do in MLS, it's a very flipping league. There's a lot of parity. There's only a handful of teams that really are consistently on top and consistently around. I mean, look at Galaxy. Galaxy were like the Yankees of MLS, and they've been down and out for the last 4 or 5 years. This league, you can have some bad years. And so I hope we don't see that. But if we do, I think that definitely would be something that will make people go God, these last 2 seasons without playoffs sucks, man. It was pretty cool when we were actually getting to the playoffs every year under Gary, and he'll get there. He'll get the respect back eventually down the line. Hunter says Evatt out of Bolton was the one who stood out to me. I think it'd be an absolute steal if we picked him up. Yeah, there was a couple like young coaches, younger coaches that were on Chris's list from like the championship or lower divisions in England. I think he also had a Coventry's coach as a potential candidate. But I think a lot of those, like I said with Carrick, and I think Solskjaer too, I think he's young enough that he may still want to sniff around Europe a little bit longer. I don't know. Like, I don't, and we don't really know what Nashville will pay. I mean, if Nashville backs up the Brinks truck, it'll change who they can get. But I think some of these younger European-based managers probably maybe are still holding out that maybe they can jump from the championship to the Premier League or something like that and aren't quite ready to come and take the leap to MLS. But you never know. It's one of the podcasts, I can't remember which one, but they did point out, Ian Ayre has history as, a director of clubs in both England and Germany. So he's got connections all over Europe. And, so it's not entirely impossible to think that we could pluck a, European coach over and bring them in. Unless there's I actually do think like some of those younger guys would be like a better option than just about anything else. But once again, don't know for sure how likely it is that any of them would jump over. Yeah, Joseph says the issue with the lack of the defensive foundation this season hurts. It's clear it was more than a Walker being hurt. Oh yeah, I mean, at first, obviously Jack Marr, he's been kind of like the poster boy for the defensive struggles this year. He's had just a really, really bad season and hasn't looked much better since Walker's come back in. So the idea that he was just being enhanced by Walker's, probably not the case. I think it certainly would be a lot better if Walker and McNaughton were in there together, but I think our midfield defense hasn't been as stable of a screen in front of the back line as it had in previous seasons. I would have loved if he'd come back, but he wasn't going to play every game. And, we needed to replace him at some point. But there's a huge Dax McCarty-sized hole in this squad, both in his ability to play as a screen in front of the back line and to be a progressive passer, moving the ball from midfield into attack. Like, we've got nobody who can really do that to the level he could. Like, Drew Yearwood's had a few good moments. Godoy has flashes here and there, but at the level Dax was able to do that at his peak, we don't have anybody on the squad who can do that right now. And it's a glaring issue, both offensively and defensively for us. And once again, that speaks to what I was kind of saying earlier. There is a degree to which the players and the front office who brought in and assembled this squad have to take some responsibility for the shortcomings. And that's another reason I think Mike Jacobs probably has a plan, probably did this firing with an eye on who the next coach was already kind of lined up, because he a chopping block. If things go further off the rails this season, he's the next one who's going to have to answer the bell. So he's got to, whether it's him making the decision fully, and Ayre, working together, they got to pray they get whoever they bring in to be the new coach, right? Because that's, they're the next ones out. We saw it with, we've seen it multiple times where, you get the coaching hire right, you're safe. You mess that up, you're gone too. Hunter says, outside of Leagues Cup, we weren't exactly great last season. The month before, we were getting stomped, and we struggled against teams we should have beaten easily before getting lucky on PKs. Yeah, it was a weird season last year. I've talked about this in a couple of the streams and stuff this year. We had a really good stretch to start the season. I think we were 10 or 13 games unbeaten. We were pretty high up the table. We were knocking on the door of top 2-3. And then about the month before Leagues Cup, we hit a little bit of a skid. Decent run in Leagues Cup. As you mentioned, it was kind of elevated by winning games on PKs rather than actually winning the games, which that was one of my arguments all along with sticking with Gary. Why I thought it was worth sticking with Gary is he could be the type of coach that could get us wins and knockout games because you play solid structural defense. If you got to go to PKs, go to PKs. Ultimately, it didn't look like we were going to get the chance to get to any kind of knockout tournament this year with the way we were playing. So I guess that's probably another reason why the decision had to be made. Love Will's work rate, but man, it'd be nice if it wasn't a starter on this team. I've said that so many times. Love the dude. I love having a player like him in the squad where he's just like a Swiss Army knife where you can put him at right back, you can put him at center mid, you can put him on the wing. He kind of reminds me of he could go in a goalkeeper if there's an emergency situation. I'm sure he would probably be our emergency goalkeeper. But yeah, I would agree. He would be so much better as a player that gives you a spark off the bench, a little bit of hustle or late in the game when you need to close the game down, just a guy to kind of grind out, spot starter here and there when you need to fill in or the guy needs a rest. But yeah, him being somebody who started every game this season is, I don't think a great spot, for us as a team. I don't think that's a player who you want to be a regular first 11 choice player, but we'll see what happens going forward with that. I mean, there's only so much you can do with Randall Leal has just never been healthy. It's just never, ever, ever been available. I forgot I had one more name I wanted to mention here. I got another comment from Hunter. Let's go to this first, though. Do you feel like Ingram could have given an ultimatum to Mike last night or this morning, either fire Gary or they both get fired after watching that game? I did. I think I mentioned this. I don't think I said it yet on the stream, but I think I mentioned it in my blog from the game last night when I was talking about Gary Smith getting fired. When I added on to that, I saw John Ingram at the game last night. He was there. He was walking around. So to your point, Hunter, he was there. He saw the game. If he saw what I think a lot of us fans saw in that performance, there's a very good chance that he gave Mike a call and said, hey, you got to do something. You got to do something here. So that's entirely possible. But I do think I've heard Mike talk a lot. I went to like a couple different things where he's been a speaker at things. So they weren't like media events where he's talking to the media. It was just him openly talking and communicating and sharing his philosophy on things. And he seems like a really well-spoken, well thought out guy. Like he doesn't do things rashly. So he might have been getting pressure coming from Ingram to do something, but I think he would have probably communicated to John and said, hey, let me get my ducks in a row. Let me see what our options are. And let me figure something out. At least that's what, once again, that is my hope. That's what I'm hoping for, because if we fired Gary just for the sake of firing Gary and we don't have any kind of plan of action, attack plan of what to do going forward, and this random, player development coach is going to be ended up coaching the rest of the season, that's troublesome, but we'll see what happens. I got one other. This is just completely off the wall, completely random. This is a candidate I came up with. And I don't know if he's a good candidate. I don't know if it even makes sense because, the idea of translating from college to pro, we don't really always know how that would work in soccer, or really in any sports. It's always a weird thing if a coach is going to jump from a collegiate coach to a pro coach. But I mean, Caleb Porter, he did it, going from Akron, I believe, to the MLS level, and successful at times. I think he won at least one cup before kind of watching out at the places he's been, and not off to a great start at his New England tenure. But I mean, I think you would say he's been a decent MLS coach jumping over from college. So there is a collegiate coach living here in Nashville who has been to the NCAA tournament multiple times, pushed his team up to being the number one ranked team in the nation a few times, and just coming off last season had two of his players drafted in the top 10 of the MLS Cup Super Cup, one of whom we saw last night with Toronto FC. I actually saw this person at the game last night because he was there to see his former player play. I actually even played for this person myself back in my high school days before this person went up to coaching at the collegiate level. And that's Lipscomb's coach, Charles Morrow. Now, once again, I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if, he could make the jump from collegiate to pro. I don't know, how much his style of coaching that works so well at the collegiate level would translate to professional level. But I mean, he just freshly put two high-level pros into the MLS. Before he got to Lipscomb, that program was, not much of anything, and he's turned it into pretty much a regular national power. I wouldn't be opposed to it. It'd be fun to have that connection. Be like, oh, hey, I know the coach of a professional soccer team in my hometown. He was actually my high school coach for a period of time. That's so weird. That's so crazy. I don't think that would happen. Although Mike Jacobs and Charles Morrow do go back. They have connections. They have some history together. So there's another little wrinkle into that one right there. So, but yeah, I just want to throw that one out there. Just kind of off the wall, funny, crazy. Who knows? Probably not, but maybe type of candidate. Let's see. Got Toronto with suspensions and injuries, and Atlanta has been struggling lately. Hopefully the boys can capitalize over the weekend and get some momentum. Yeah, that's the thing is, and maybe that's the thing. Maybe another factor, Atlanta's been out of form lately. Could be a situation where we looked at it and said, we can't have another game where we waste an opportunity. We got to get a spark going now. So good shout on that one there for sure. Yeah, I think that's it. We still don't know a whole lot. It's still very fresh. I don't even think we've really gotten a full, outside of the press release communication from the club. I don't believe there's been a press conference or anything yet, which is a little bit odd. It feels like, this would be the time for Ian or Mike to kind of stand up in front of the media and do some talking. There may be one, coming later today or tomorrow or something like that, I'm sure. But we'll have to see what comes out going forward. I'm still planning on doing the live stream tomorrow night, bringing back another Friday night live stream, trying to get back in the regular habit of doing that, because by tomorrow night we'll have probably a little bit more information. Have a little bit more updates from there and see if there's any new information to go off there. We'll talk a little bit more about previewing the Atlanta game. I'll probably also talk about like the Titans. Their schedule came out, so it'll be interesting to kind of look through that and see what we think might happen this year with them. Joseph says, is Gary's post game available anywhere online? I know Ben Wright and Valer, two of the guys from Speedway Soccer and Pharmaceutical Soccer, I believe, have been tweeting out some clips from it. Usually, I think Speedway Soccer posts the full video on their YouTube channel. I don't know if I've seen it up yet or not, but yeah, I'd say go to Ben Wright's Twitter or Valer's Twitter and see if they've posted anything that would link you to it, because they both usually attend the press conferences and usually have clips. And like I said, Speedway Soccer's YouTube also usually has the full press conference as well. Hunter says, I think I heard that Mike and John are going to be taking questions post-game Saturday. Yeah, I would think they, would have to speak at some point in time. We should have a pregame press conference. You usually have a press conference either a day or two before the match. So I think there would be a pre-Atlanta press conference either today or tomorrow, but that would usually be the coach and a player. But yeah, it could be like Mike and John getting their ducks in a row and getting ready to speak. And if they speak post-game Saturday, great. I'll be looking forward to hearing that. Because unfortunately, I will not be at the game Saturday. Thought I was going to have a 2-vlog week from game days, but then I'm an idiot and double booked myself to referee all day Saturday. So I forgot it was an early kickoff. I thought it was like, the usual 7:30 local time kickoff. And so I was like, oh yeah, I can ref like 3 games in the morning. No big deal. Now I'm like, oh, well, the game's actually at 12:30. Whoops. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for those of you that were jumping in and participating in the chat. Like I said, we'll